My 17-year-old daughter spent a full year creating a deeply personal gift for my father. A hand-bound, meticulously researched family history book. My father is a celebrated history professor. He gutted her book for the antique photos, stole her research for his own publication, and left the rest in the kindling box next to his fireplace. I didn't scream. I waited. And at his own book launch, in front of his colleagues and the entire university history department, I brought the evidence. It all started with a quiet hum of ambition, the kind that feels pure and hopeful, before the world gets its hands on it. For a year, the backdrop of my life was the soft scratch of my daughter Maya's pen on archival paper, the gentle click of her laptop keys late into the night, and the smell of old books and brewing coffee. She was on a mission, a historical and emotional excavation, all for her grandfather. My father, Dr. Alistair Finch. To the world, he was a distinguished professor of American history, a man whose name was on the spine of 3 well-respected books, a man who lectured on the importance of primary sources and historical integrity. To Maya, he was a giant, an intellectual titan she desperately wanted to impress. His 70th birthday was approaching, and she wanted to give him something more than a store-bought sweater or another biography of a president he already owned. She wanted to give him a piece of himself, a piece of us. She decided to compile our family's entire history, from the first ancestor who stepped off a boat from Ireland in the 1880s, all the way to her. It wasn't just a family tree. It was a narrative. She spent weekends in dusty county clerk offices, her summers corresponding with distant cousins in other states, and her savings on digitizing fragile, sepia-toned photographs. She learned the stories behind the names. The farmer who lost everything in the Dust Bowl, the great-great-aunt who was a nurse in World War I, the grandfather who worked the steel mills in Pennsylvania. She breathed life into ghosts. The final product was breathtaking. A thick leather-bound book with our family crest embossed on the cover. Inside, hundreds of pages of narrative, genealogical charts, restored photographs, and even laminated copies of original documents, census records, marriage certificates, handwritten letters. It was a work of art, a labor of profound love. The day of his party, she was vibrating with nervous energy. She held the heavy book in her arms, like it was a holy text. Parte 2. My father's 70th birthday party was exactly what you'd expect. Held in the oak-paneled library of his sprawling university town home, filled with academics in tweed jackets, wine that cost more than my weekly groceries, and a low murmur of intellectual chatter. My brother, Ethan, was there, of course. Ethan, the successful corporate lawyer, the golden son who had followed the prescribed path to success. His son, 12-year-old Leo, was running around showing everyone a diorama he'd made for school. A messy, glue-stained depiction of the Battle of Gettysburg. "Look at the detail on this," my father boomed, holding up the shoebox for everyone to see. "This boy has a real mind for strategy. A future historian, perhaps." He beamed, ruffling Leo's hair. I caught Maya's eye from across the room. She gave me a small, tight smile. She was used to this. We both were. When it was time for gifts, Maya stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she presented the enormous book. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," she said, her voice soft but clear. I made this for you." My father took the book. He ran a hand over the leather cover, his expression unreadable. He opened it, flipping through the first few pages. He paused at a restored photo of his own mother as a young girl. He said. Just, He continued to flip, his eyes scanning the pages with the speed of a man who reads for a living, not for pleasure. He wasn't absorbing the stories. He was skimming the data. After maybe 45 seconds, he closed it. He looked at Maya, a small, polite smile on his lips. A fine effort, Maya. Very thorough. Thank you. And that was it. He placed the book on a side table, next to a stack of napkins, and turned his attention back to Leo's diorama. Now, who wants to hear about Leo's brilliant use of cotton balls for cannon smoke? The light in Maya's eyes dimmed. It was a familiar feeling, a cold shadow I'd lived under my entire life. The feeling of bringing your whole heart to someone, only to have them weigh it, find it wanting, and set it aside without a second thought. She tried to hide her disappointment, but I saw it. I saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way she busied herself by straightening the crease in her dress. Later that night, as we drove home, she was quiet. He said it was a fine effort, she whispered into the darkness of the car. That's what he writes on the papers of his C- students. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached over and squeezed her hand. A useless gesture against a hurt so deep and so old. Part 3. The days after the party were quiet. Too quiet. Maya retreated into herself. The vibrant energy of her year-long project replaced by a listless melancholy. She stopped talking about history, stopped asking me questions about our family. The silence in the house was heavy, thick with unspoken disappointment. I told myself my father was just my father. Socially awkward, emotionally constipated, a man who communicates affection through academic critique. Maybe he was taking his time with the book. Maybe he was savoring it in private. Maybe, in his own way, he was proud. I was a master of constructing these hopeful delusions. It was a survival skill I'd honed over 40-plus years. About a week later, I had to go back to his house to pick up a serving dish I'd left behind. I let myself in with the spare key he insisted I keep, but hoped I'd never use. The house was empty. He was teaching a seminar, and my mother was at her weekly bridge club. The house smelled of lemon polish and old paper, a scent I'd always associated with a kind of suffocating intellectualism. I found my dish in the kitchen and was about to leave when I decided to peek into his study. I don't know why. A morbid curiosity, perhaps. A need to see if the book was on display, sitting on his grand mahogany desk like a prized possession. The study was immaculate, as always. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, organized by period and region. His desk was clear except for his laptop, a stack of graded papers, and a high-end flatbed scanner. And next to the scanner was a neat pile of old photographs and documents. I recognized them instantly. There was the sepia portrait of my great-great-grandmother. There was the fragile yellowed letter from my great-uncle, sent from the trenches in France. They were Maya's discoveries, the primary sources she had so carefully curated. They had been removed from her book. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, washed over me. My eyes darted around the room searching. Where was the book itself? It wasn't on the desk. It wasn't on the shelves. It wasn't on the reading stand by his armchair. Then I saw it. To the side of the grand stone fireplace, there was an antique copper bin where my father kept kindling and old newspapers. and sticking out from the top of the pile, I saw a flash of dark brown leather. The family crest. My stomach plunged. I walked over slowly, as if approaching the scene of an accident. I reached in and pulled it out. It was her book, or what was left of it. The binding was broken, cracked down the spine, as if it had been forced open and flattened. Huge sections of pages were gone, crudely cut out with what looked like an ex-acto knife, leaving jagged, empty windows in the narrative. All the original photos, the laminated documents, the carefully restored portraits, all of it had been surgically removed. What remained was just Maya's writing, her research, her soul, discarded and left a scrap. It was in the kindling box. He had gutted my daughter's heart for parts and left the rest to be burned. Part cuatro. I stood there in the silent study, holding the desecrated book in my hands. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just indifference. This was an act of profound, calculated violation. He hadn't just thrown it away. He had plundered it. He had seen the value in her work, the raw materials, the primary sources he so revered, and he had taken them for himself, discarding the vessel she had so lovingly crafted. The vessel that was, in itself, the point of the gift. The rage that filled me was nothing like I had ever felt before. It was arctic cold. It was silent and absolute. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowing my own hurt to keep the peace, of making excuses for his coldness. It all evaporated in that one moment. My gaze fell back to his desk, to the scanner. Next to it was an external hard drive, and next to that, a printed-out book proposal. The title read, The American Story, An Intimate History. The author, Dr. Alistair Finch. It was his next book. He was stealing her work. Not just the photos, but her narrative threads, her discoveries. He was going to pass off her year of tireless, loving labor as his own academic coup. I felt a tremor in my hands, a desire to smash something, to scream until the windows rattled. But I didn't. Screaming was my mother's territory. Drama was for my brother. My domain had always been the quiet, unseen work of holding things together. And now, I would use that same quietness to take everything apart. I carefully placed the gutted book into my tote bag. I walked back to the desk, took out my phone, and took several clear, high-resolution photographs. The scanner, the stack of Maya's photos, the book proposal, the hard drive. Then I went back to the fireplace and took more photos of the ruined book sitting in the kindling bin. Evidence. Primary sources. He had taught me the value of those, after all. When I got home, Maya was in the living room, trying to read, but mostly just staring at the wall. She saw the bag in my hand, and then she saw the ruined book as I pulled it out and placed it on the coffee table. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just stared at it, her face pale. She reached out a finger and traced the broken spine. She looked at the empty spaces where the faces of her ancestors used to be. Then she looked up at me, and her expression was one of such profound, hollowed-out betrayal that it broke my heart all over again. "He took them," she whispered. It wasn't a question. "He's using them for his new book, isn't he?" I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. That's when she finally cried. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but silent, heartbroken tears that streamed down her face as she looked at the wreckage of her love and effort. I wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time, I didn't say, "It's okay." I didn't say, "We'll get through this." I just held her and said, "I am so sorry." And in my mind, a plan began to form. A cold, clear, and methodical plan. He wanted to write a book about history? Fine. I was about to make him a part of it. Partfai. As I sat there holding my weeping daughter, my mind spooled back through a lifetime of similar, smaller paper cuts. My father, Alistair, never believed in participation trophies. Not for me, anyway. For my brother, Ethan, every breath was an achievement. Ethan was the son, the one who went to an Ivy League law school, the one who argued cases, who moved in circles of power and influence. He was a reflection of our father's own intellectual vanity. I, on the other hand, had chosen a quieter path. I became a librarian, an archivist. My world was one of preservation, of quiet service to knowledge. To my father, it was a quaint hobby, not a serious profession. "Handling books is not the same as writing them, Clara," he'd said once, a casual dismissal that had stung for weeks. He saw my work as feminine, passive. His work was masculine, active. He created knowledge. I merely catalogued it. This dynamic colored everything. When Ethan published a minor article in a legal journal, my father had it framed and hung it in his study. When I was promoted to head archivist at the city library, he'd nodded and said, "Well, the benefits must be good." There was no praise, no recognition of the skill and dedication it took. There was only the subtle, constant judgment that I had somehow fallen short of the Finch family standard of aggressive, public achievement. This favoritism extended to the next generation. Ethan's son, Leo, was a genius for building a messy diorama. Maya, who could intelligently discuss the socio-economic impact of the Erie Canal, at 16, was met with a critical, It was a slow, emotional poisoning, a drip feed of inadequacy that I had learned to metabolize. But seeing Maya go through it was different. I had hoped, foolishly, that she would be the exception, that her brilliance, her genuine passion for his own field, would finally break through his armor. Instead, he had seen her passion not as a gift to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited. The financial component was another layer to this silent, ugly story. My parents lived well beyond the professor's pension. The big house, the wine, the trips to academic conferences in Europe. It was a lifestyle my mother refused to relinquish. Ethan contributed, of course, but his contributions were always framed as grand, generous gestures. A check at Christmas, a gift of a new car. My contributions were the quiet, unglamorous ones. I was the one who paid their property tax bill when they forgot. I was the one who covered the cost of a new furnace in the middle of winter. I was the one who topped up their grocery delivery account every month. It was never discussed. It was just an expectation. The duty of the responsible, ever-present daughter. I was the family scaffold, holding everything up so the beautiful facade could remain intact. And I had done it without complaint, because I thought that was my role. That was the price of peace. But as I sat there, holding the physical evidence of my father's theft, I realized the price had become too high. The peace was an illusion. It was just silence. And silence, I now understood, was the sound of my daughter's heart being broken. The scaffolding was coming down. Part 6. In the 2 months that followed, a strange calm settled over our house. Maya and I operated in a bubble of quiet purpose. We didn't talk about my father. We didn't mention the book. Instead, I helped her turn her pain into a project. Using the digital copies she had saved, she started a website. Not a big, flashy thing, but a simple, elegant blog called The Ancestors' Archives. She began posting the stories she had uncovered, one by one. The story of our Irish ancestor who became a union organizer. The story of the aunt who ran a secret boarding house for unmarried mothers in the 1920s. She posted the restored photos, the transcribed letters. She wrote with a new voice, not the voice of a student trying to impress a professor, but the voice of a storyteller honoring her subjects. She was finding her own power, separate from his validation. Meanwhile, I waited. I monitored the university press website. In late autumn, the announcement appeared. For immediate release, Dr. Alistair Finch's magnum opus, The American Story, an intimate history. Set for release in January. A book launch and signing will be held on campus on January 15th. I printed the announcement and taped it to the inside of a kitchen cabinet. Every morning I would see it when I reached for a coffee mug. It was my focal point. A deadline. The day of the launch arrived. It was a cold, crisp evening. The university's grand hall was packed. His colleagues were there, the university president, the dean of the history department, reporters from the local paper, and the alumni magazine. My mother was in the front row, glowing with pride, dressed in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. My brother Ethan and his family were there, looking smug and successful. They were the perfect family, gathered to celebrate their patriarch's crowning achievement. Maya and I slipped in and stood at the back. She was clutching my hand, her knuckles white. She was wearing a simple black dress, and in a small bag, she carried the gutted remains of her book. I was calm. My heart was beating steadily. I felt no fear, only a righteous glacial clarity. My father took the stage to a round of thunderous applause. He spoke for 20 minutes, his voice resonant and confident. He talked about his years of research, the serendipitous discoveries in dusty archives, the long-forgotten voices he had unearthed. He spoke of the historian's sacred duty to the truth. I almost laughed. Then came the Q&A. A few phoning questions from his graduate students, a polite inquiry from a fellow professor. Then the moderator looked around the room. "Any final questions?" I raised my hand. He squinted toward the back of the room, not recognizing me at first. "Yes, the lady in the back." I walked calmly to the microphone set up in the aisle. The spotlight found me. My father's smile faltered slightly as he saw who it was. "Clara," he said, his voice tight. "What a surprise." "Hello, Dad," I said. My voice amplified throughout the silent hall. "It's Dr. Finch tonight, I believe. I have a question about your research methodology." A low murmur went through the crowd. This was unexpected. "In your speech," I continued, "you spoke beautifully about primary sources. In your acknowledgments, you thanked the university archives and the National Archives. But I noticed a significant omission." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I looked directly at him. His face had gone pale. "Could you tell the audience about your primary researcher? the one who spent a year of her life compiling the intimate family histories, restoring the photographs, and transcribing the letters that form the core of at least 3 chapters of your new book. I reached into the bag and pulled out the ruined book, holding it up for the room to see. The broken spine, the gaping holes in the pages. "Specifically," I said, my voice ringing with cold precision, "I'm referring to your 17-year-old granddaughter, Maya, the author of this book, which I found in your kindling box after you had plundered it for parts. My question, Dr. Finch, is this. Is this what you meant by historical integrity? Absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet." My father stood frozen behind the lectern, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. My mother looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Ethan was halfway out of his seat, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. The reporters were scribbling furiously. I had not yelled. I had not cried. I had simply presented the evidence. I had used his own language, in his own church, to hold him accountable. I placed the gutted book on the edge of the stage, turned and walked out of the hall, with Maya right beside me. Percepe. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. It was like a dam breaking. Before we even got to the car, Maya's phone was buzzing with notifications. Someone in the audience had been live tweeting the event. The clip of my question, filmed on a shaky phone, was already circulating. By the time we got home, the university's history department had posted a terse statement on their website. In light of information presented at this evening's event, the university is launching a full investigation into allegations of academic misconduct concerning Dr. Alistair Finch. The publication and promotion of The American Story are suspended indefinitely. My phone started ringing. The first call was from my brother, Ethan. He didn't say hello. He just started screaming. "What did you do? What in God's name did you do? You've destroyed him. You've destroyed this entire family over some stupid high school project." "It wasn't a stupid project, Ethan," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It was Maya's work, and he stole it. That's called plagiarism. As a lawyer, you should know that. This isn't about the law. This is about loyalty. This is about reputation. Do you have any idea what this will do to all of us? To Mom? To Dad's pension? Did you have any idea what he did to my daughter?" I shot back. "When he ripped her heart out and left it to be burned? Did you care about her loyalty? Her feelings?" He sputtered, speechless for a moment. "You are vindictive and cruel, Clara. You've always been jealous of him." "No, Ethan," I said, and the finality in my voice scared even me. "I'm just done. Done paying for your perfect family portrait. The bill is now officially with you." I hung up. The next call was my mother. She was weeping. Not the angry, screaming tears of my brother, but the manipulative, guilt-inducing sobs I knew so well. "Clara, how could you? In public? He's your father. You have to retract it. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. A collaboration. We can fix this if you just tell them you were confused." "Was I confused when I found the book in the fireplace, Mom?" I asked. "Was Maya confused when he dismissed her year of work in under a minute? Was he confused when he scanned her photos for his own book? He was going to give her credit," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "He told me he was planning a special mention in the preface." "A footnote for a ghostwriter is not credit, Mom. It's an insult, and you know it." "You're tearing this family apart," she wailed. "No," I said, looking over at Maya, who was now sitting at the kitchen table, watching me with wide, serious eyes. He tore it apart when he decided his ambition was more important than his granddaughter. I'm just cleaning up the wreckage. I ended the call and blocked both their numbers. The story exploded. It was the perfect academic scandal. The celebrated professor and the brilliant, wronged granddaughter. Local news picked it up. Then, national blogs. Forbes ran an article titled, "The Perils of Plagiarism Begin at Home." An academic integrity watchdog group issued a statement. My father went from celebrated author to campus pariah overnight. The consequences were not abstract. They were swift, public, and brutal. And for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt. Only the clean, sharp relief of a truth finally told. Partato. In the wake of the implosion, something remarkable happened. Maya bloomed. The validation she had so desperately sought from her grandfather and been denied was now coming at her from all corners of the world. Her website, The Ancestors' Archives, saw its traffic spike by thousands of %. People started leaving comments, not just saying "great post," but sharing their own family stories, asking for advice on their own genealogical searches. An editor from a major online magazine that focused on personal essays reached out and asked her to write her story. She wrote it. She wrote about the year of research, the hope, the crushing disappointment, and the final public confrontation. She wrote with an honesty and vulnerability that was breathtaking. She didn't write to shame her grandfather. She wrote to reclaim her own narrative. The essay went viral. It was shared by genealogists, by writers, by academics, and by thousands of people who knew what it felt like to be made small by someone they loved. Out of that essay came an offer. A small independent publishing house, one specializing in history and biography, offered her a book deal. Not to publish the original family history, but to write a new book, a guide for young people on how to uncover their own family stories, woven through with her own personal journey. They weren't interested in her as a source of data. They were interested in her as a voice. She signed the contract at our kitchen table, her hand steady, a small triumphant smile on her face. She was no longer a footnote in someone else's story. She was writing her own. My lesson in all of this was quieter, but just as profound. I had spent my entire life believing that my role was to be the peacemaker, the absorber of slights, the silent girder supporting the family structure. I thought that setting a boundary, speaking a hard truth, was an act of aggression, a destructive force. But I was wrong. Setting that boundary was the most constructive thing I have ever done. It wasn't about tearing my father down. It was about building my daughter up. It was about declaring that her worth, her work, and her heart were not disposable. True legacy, I realized, isn't about the books you publish or the reputation you build. It's about the integrity you live by. It's about being able to look your child in the eye and know that you did everything in your power to protect their light from being extinguished. My father had built a legacy of paper and ink. I was building one of backbone and love. Partnoi, it's been 2 years. Maya's book, Finding Your People, became a surprise bestseller. It's praised for its warmth, its practical advice, and its empowering message. She deferred college for a year to go on a small book tour, speaking at libraries and historical societies, the very kinds of places I built my quiet career in. She's a natural, People connect with her. She's now in her first year at a top university, studying history and digital humanities, not to impress anyone, but because she genuinely loves it. Her blog is a thriving community. She is happy. She is whole. My father was forced into early retirement by the university. The investigation found significant and undeniable evidence of academic dishonesty. His book was never published. They moved out of the big house, selling it to cover legal fees and the loss of income. They live in a small condo on the other side of the state. I hear from a cousin occasionally that my mother works part-time at a department store gift-wrapping counter. My brother, Ethan, sends a generic holiday card every year, addressed only to me, with no personal note inside. The silence from them is total. I have never once regretted what I did. I mourn the father I wished I had, not the one I actually lost. The truth is, he was lost to me long before that night. What I did was simply hold a mirror up to the reality that had existed for decades. Some people, I've learned, can't stand to see their own reflection. They'd rather shatter the mirror and blame you for the broken glass. But my responsibility was no longer to protect his fragile ego. It was to protect my daughter's resilient heart. We don't need his validation anymore. We have our own. We have each other, our little family, built not on a grand public legacy, but on the quiet, fierce strength of a truth that refused to be burned. But now I want to ask you. What I did was public, and it ended a man's career. Was it an act of righteous justice for my daughter? Or did I take it too far? Was there another way? Or was a public stage the only language he would ever have understood? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you have a story about standing up for someone you love, I would be honored to read it. Thank you for listening.